Today is January the 17th, 2019. I am Dale Baker from the Suwannee County Historical Commission. I am assisted by Janet Arrett, a member of the Suwannee County Historical Commission, and videographers Steve Schneikman and Casson Stacy of Do Good Media. This morning, we are interviewing Sherwood Boatwright, also a member of the Suwannee County Historical Commission. As part of our oral history project, Mr. Boatwright, we appreciate you for taking time from your busy schedule to participate in this project. I am sure that your insights into local history will be of great value for generations to come. We're going to ask you some personal information, your name, age, and birthday.
Okay. I was born April the 18th, 1936 in Suwannee County, Florida. In fact, the house I still live in.
And can you tell me about this house that you were born in, about where it's located in Suwannee County?
Mm-hmm. It's about 12 miles southwest of Live Oak.
Can you tell us about your family and your early childhood?
Mm.
When your original house where you were born, when it was built?
They bought the land in 1920 and built the house in 1922. And that's where we were all born and raised. And Mom and Daddy built it themselves.
And where did y'all get the timber from?
Off the farm.
Okay. And about how long did it take to build this house?
About 2 years. They started in 1920 and they moved in 1922.
And what size was the original farm, and what size was the farm when you acquired the whole farm as it is now?
Okay. He bought 80 acres to start off with from his uncle. And then he went back and bought 80 more acres from the same uncle, which gave him 160. And then he bought 40 acres, which joined it, which had previously belonged to his stepmother, Miss Della Ross.
And who was this uncle? Do you remember?
Uh-huh. Andrew Boatwright.
Who were your parents and where were they from?
Okay, my daddy was Joseph Arch Boatwright, and he was born in 1892, died in 1959. And he was basically from Suwannee County, but his parents had moved to Taylor County, and I think he was the only sibling that was born in Taylor County. And then they moved back to Suwannee County.
Your mother?
My mother was Susan Elizabeth Starling Boatwright, and she was born down close to Charles Springs. And I guess they built that house in the 1880s, 90s along there. So she lived her entire early childhood there until she got married. So that house and the house that she was living in when she died were the only two houses she'd ever lived in.
And who were your grandparents?
My father's father was Monroe Boatwright, and his wife, which was my grandmother, was from Lafayette County, and her name was, she was a Hatcher, Susan Ella Hatcher. And my mother's father was William Allen Starling, and his wife was Susan Bale Starling.
Do you have any stories about your parents or grandparents, what they did for a living?
Yeah. my grandmother and grandfather, Starling, farmed for a living, and so did my parents, Joe and Elizabeth Boatwright, farmed for a living.
And how was you involved on the farm?
Just doing chores around the farm. We all did that.
Do you have any brothers and sisters?
Yes, I was one of 13. The oldest child was born in 1920, 1918, I'm sorry, 1918, and he died in 1920, and his name was Joseph Town Boatwright. The next one was a girl, and her name was Honorine Boatwright Harris, and she was born in 1920, and she died in 1960. And the next was a brother, his name was Thomas Lee Boatwright, and he was born in 1922 and died in 1995. The next one was Kari Boatwright, and he was born in 1926 and died in he was born in 26, but he died in 1991. The next was a girl, and her name was Winifred Boatwright Paget, and she was born in 1928, and she died in 2004. The next one was a sister, Margaret. She married a baker, and she died in 2017. The next was a brother, Alfred, and he was born in 1931. Did I say Mark was born in 1930? Right. The brother was born in 31, and he died in 1917. The next was a brother, Alan Chesley Boatwright Pete, and he was born in 33, and he's still living. And the next brother was born in 1935, and Billy Ray Boatwright, and he passed away in 2015. And of course, I was born in 1936. And then the next brother, Ronald, was born in 1938, and he's still living. And the baby of all of us was Spencer Boatwright, and he was born in 1940, and he's still living. But I think to be a farm family, 5 of us went to college, and that was most unusual then. We have some 2-year degrees. 2 of us have 4-year degrees. One has a master's and one has a doctorate. And that was unusual back then. We were the only ones in our family on either side to go to college. But it was instilled in us to work hard to get ahead. Okay?
What are some of your earliest memories as you was growing up? Memories on the farm, what you had to do and what your parents were doing, how you were helping them.
Well, of course, Daddy was farming. So, and we went to school all the time. So when we'd come in, we'd have to get up the house wood, the stove wood, feed the chickens, feed the hogs, feed the cows, and all that good stuff. But we didn't do that much in the field.
Were you involved in tobacco and cotton?
I'll remember picking cotton one time. I was about 10 years old, and I picked cotton all day and maybe picked 10 pounds of cotton, so I was no cotton picker. Then I worked in the tobacco, but I'd string the tobacco, and I did that until I started teaching school. I'd come home from college in the summer and work in tobacco.
As you and your siblings were growing up, what type of games did you play as a child and a teenager?
Okay. We played baseball. We made a ball out of cotton twine and played with it. And we had a swing filled with dirt in a burlap bag and would swing on it. And we played marbles, hopscotch, seesaw, jump board, tilly whirl. All of it was basically stuff we had made because they didn't buy that much. We didn't have toys, bought toys, so to speak.
What did your parents do for a living, and what type of animals and crops did they grow?
Okay. The only thing they ever did was to farm, basically. Now, Daddy served as county commissioner from 56 to 60. And other than that, he farmed. And they grew cotton in the early years. But about 1941 or 2, we had about 10 acres of cotton, and we never got over it one time. So therefore, he probably lost money that year. But he started growing tobacco like in 1926 and grew it up to 1966.
And what other crops did your parents grow?
Corn, peanuts, tobacco. Tobacco was the main money crop.
Tell us about your family church.
Okay. My family belonged to a primitive Baptist church down close to Beulah Church, down close to Charles Springs. And my great-grandfather was a preacher of that denomination. And there was a little church over in Lafayette County that they had to go to, that they had no church here close to them. So they had to cross the river. So if the ferry wasn't on the side they were, they couldn't go to church. So they decided to be a Patmos church, which is down about a half a mile from Beulah Church. And it was established in 1902. Okay, the church closed its doors about 2000, but several of us would meet every month on until about 2008. And my brother served that church. My grandfather established the church that broke away from Mount Nebo in Lafayette County. And then my oldest sister's husband served that church for a number of years. And of course, the preachers didn't get paid. There was no Sunday school or any of that church. But we could go to O'Brien to a church. We could go above Live Oak to a church. So there was a church we could go to every weekend, basically. And we did go to, most of the time, to the other churches as well. We call it visiting those people.
Which is the two churches you just mentioned, down at O'Brien and one north of Live Oak?
Do you want the name of the churches? The one at O'Brien was Cedar Grove. And the one above Live Oak was Zion's Hope. And they're out close to about 4 miles north of Live Oak.
What was and is your position at the church?
Okay, I served as clerk from 1960, 61, until the church closed. And I guess you could say I was the custodian.
When you were growing up, how was your laundry done?
They'd boil water in a wash pot, and then they would scrub them on a scrub board and hang them on a clothesline.
And what about soap?
Mama made the soap, and it was lye soap. They called it. And the reason they called it lye soap because they put lye in the soap, and she'd cook lye with drippings of hog's lard and let it cook until it, I guess, thickened and that lye dissolved. And then she'd take it up in old dish pans and cool it, and would make, and that's what she washed the clothes in.
When did y'all get a washing machine?
1939. That's when we got electricity.
How was your cooking done?
Well, up until I was basically in high school, was done on a wood stove. And then we got a gas stove, so we had a wood stove and a gas stove. Then we taught Mom into getting rid of the wood stove, so we just had a gas stove.
And for your meals for breakfast and the other meals, what did you have?
For breakfast, we basically had grits and eggs and syrup and cow cream and cow butter, chocolate milk, ham, sausage, depending on what we wanted.
And what about canning?
Mama did quite a bit of canning, particularly like thick preserves, pear preserves, stuff for soup, stuff like that.
You mentioned grits. Where did you get your grits from?
In the early years, we'd shuck the corn and shell it and take it to the grits mill. And there was a grits mill at Taylor's store. That was there where you Mira lived.
And your meat?
The meat, Daddy would kill hogs and smoke it and hang it in the smokehouse. And then he would kill a beef along, and they'd give each of 4 neighbors a quarter of beef, and then the next time somebody killed, another neighbor would kill and share, and then another would kill and share. And that's how they'd have fresh meat along and along.
When you smoked your meat, how long did that take?
Well, he'd take it up to Louisville to the cold storage, and they did some kind of curing to it. Then he'd bring it back home, and we'd smoke it for maybe a month to make sure it would keep.
And what about cane grinding?
Daddy would grind cane usually around Thanksgiving, and he would usually make about 200 gallons of syrup. And he sold the syrup for $1 a gallon, but he gave away more than he sold. They were very generous people.
How did y'all do the housekeeping? Was it with a corn shuck broom or?
She had a corn shuck broom at the beginning, and she'd scrub it with lye soap, and it'd clean those floors. They'd be clean as a whistle.
What about broom sage? Did you ever use broom sage brooms?
I don't remember us using them, but I remember Grandma Starling using it.
Who lived in the original house?
Mom and Daddy.
Any children?
All the children lived there. Was all raised there
In that one house?
in that same house, and I still live there.
Okay. So the original house, though, was the smokehouse before the house you live in?
I don't know that it was the smokehouse. Some says it was, but I'm not sure. But they lived in that because they was living in a little shack over his uncle's, Andrew Boatwright. And so instead of having to walk backwards and two to build on the house, they just built a little shack type thing to live in temporarily. Because they'd have to walk about a mile and a half to get there.
And what about yard work around your house?
I did a lot of yard work. Mama had lots of flowers, and
Was it a dirt yard in the beginning and then y'all planted grass, or?
it was a dirt yard, and then we planted grass later.
What about indoor plumbing?
We got a bathroom in the 1950s. We thought we had moved uptown. But we had a shower in the wash house, so we could shower even before we had a bathroom. But we had an outdoor house.
As you was growing up, what type of jobs did you do as far as helping on the farm? You know, with the cows, hoeing and things like this?
Well, we hoed. I'd milk the cows in the morning. Even after I started teaching, I milked cows until my mother died in '67. And I did a lot of cooking to help her out as she got older. So I was sort of the handyman around there.
Did you hoe the watermelons, the tobacco, the fence lines?
We hoed it all. And the hoeing was a punishment. When we got into trouble, Mom would put us out to hoe so many strands of fence. That was her punishment, along with the peach tree switch. We had about 15 peach trees, and we accused her of killing every one of them, whipping us. And her philosophy was, don't spare the rod to spoil the child.
What type of transportation did you have growing up?
My daddy bought a truck, and that was our first transportation.
But before the truck?
They had a tractor, and before that, you just walked.
Did y'all have a horse and buggy when you was a very young child, or you?
We had a horse and wagon, right. No buggy, but a wagon.
What were the roads like when you were growing up?
3 trail roads. There was ruts for the rut in the middle was for the horse, and then they had the wheels on to the wagon on each side.
Do you remember any of the paved roads being paved, any of the dirt roads being paved?
I remember 252 was paved after I started teaching, and 51 had not been. I think it was paved in the 1930s. But most of our school bus routing was on dirt roads.
When you mentioned a tractor just now, do you remember any of the mules or plows being used?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember how many mules y'all had?
I think we had horses. I think Daddy had 3 at one time. And he kept one horse until she died to plow the garden with. And we'd ride her to look for the cows.
Do you remember when you got your first tractor and about what year it was and what kind of tractor it was?
It was a little L. John Deere, and it was about 1939, 40, somewhere along there.
Where did you go to school?
Okay, I came to Live Oak all 12 years. and I started at the Nettie Basin School, and Miss Nettie Basin was my first grade teacher, and she inspired me to be a teacher. She had me helping students with their work in the first grade, so I knew then I was going to teach school.
And the Native Basin School was first through the sixth?
It was grades 1, 2, and 3. And then the first floor, the building behind the First Baptist Church was 4, 5, 6. And the upstairs was 7 and 8. And then the high school was across the street. And it was 9, 10, 11, 12. And the egg buildings were behind the old junior high building.
Where did you go to college at?
Aurora, Illinois.
Can you tell us about when you were young, about cane grindings and peanut bowls?
Yeah, I despised the cane grinding. I didn't like to feed the meal. And there was always a ton of town people out there that we had to cook for and do for. And I think they just came to get them a jug of syrup, a bottle of syrup. A lot of them. Peanut boilings, I don't remember. We didn't have too many, but a few.
How did the Great Depression affect you and your family and your community?
Well, I really don't know because I didn't live during the Great Depression.
What impact did World War II have on your family and the local community?
A lot, because my brother was a prisoner of war for like 14 months and 3 days. So it was sort of crying times.
And what was your brother's name that was a prisoner of war?
Thomas Lee Boatwright.
And you had another brother in the military in World War II?
Corey, but he was in the Navy.
Do you remember anything about the Ruby McCullum trial?
I remember when it all happened, but it was on a Sunday, but I don't know anything about it, really, other than what, you read in the...
What's some of the biggest changes you have seen in technology, such as
telephones, automobiles, TV, computers, phones, all that good stuff.
When did you get your first phone, and was it a party line?
Yeah, we got the first phone. I was off in National Guard training in Fort Knox, Kentucky, and that was in February of 1959.
Was it a single line or party line?
Party line. I think it was 8 people on the line.
Have you seen any changes in the stores to begin with? Some of the stores that you were involved with growing up?
Yeah, I worked in a Creekmore's grocery store, and it was a general store. And she used to sell clothes and groceries. But I worked there from 1947 to 54, and it was basically just a grocery store.
Have you seen, or can you mention some of the changes you have seen in Suwannee County as far as businesses, the way they were, the way they are now?
Well, everything used to be small business, home-owned small businesses, and now a lot of it's big corporations and et cetera.
Is there something else that you would like to share with us?
No, just thank you for asking. I think it's an honor to be asked to do this. But I taught school 50 years. I started in 1958, And I taught the sixth grade from August until February. In February, I went off for National Guard training and served 6 months there. I got home on Sunday morning, started back teaching Monday morning. But I went to the high school to teach then. There was not an opening in social studies in the high school my first year.
How many years did you serve in the National Guard, and how many years did you teach?
I served in the Guards from November 58 until April 67. And I got out because I would have to go for weekends at Camp Blandon, and Daddy didn't want to stay by himself. So he asked me if I had to go, and I told him I had to go as long as I was in there. So he said he didn't want to stay by himself. My mother had died. So.
And how long did you teach?
50 years, from 1958 to 2008.
Mr. Boatwright, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned the sweet potato and sweet potato crop and storing them under your house. Could you?
Now that was Irish potatoes.
Irish potatoes.
Under the house, and because it was real sandy under there, and they would keep all year. But he would do the sweet potatoes in banks. He'd build these little teepee type things with little poles and put straw around them, and they would keep all year too.
Okay. You mentioned that Nettie Baisden was your first grade teacher.
Right.
I've heard that name ever since I've lived here, but I don't know anything about her. Could you tell me just a little bit about who she was as a person?
I don't know. I don't really know that much about her. She taught 47 years in Suwannee County. And I guess all those years she taught first grade. And that little building that they tore down where I guess they're close to Mazzelle that they tore down, was named for her, named in her honor.
Next to the football field.
Right.
Do you have any stories of being in class? You said she inspired you, but can you recall any kind of anecdote of being in class with her?
Well, she'd have me going around helping the kids with their work. And I guess because I had older siblings, I probably knew a little bit more about writing and numbers and all than the average kid did. And she'd have me go around and help them with their work in the first grade. So I knew that inspired me to teach. I knew then I was going to teach.
I have another follow-up question. You said you went to college in Illinois.
Right.
Why did you choose to go up there?
I went up to Illinois basically because I had a friend that was up there, and it was connected with Dallin Park, Deadbeat Christian Home. And basically the reason I went, because Daddy couldn't afford to send us, because there was 3 of us in college at the same time. And I washed pots and pans for $1.10 an hour all 4 years, and earned enough money to pay my college. When I got my degree, I did not owe that college 1 penny of money. And I had $7 and something in my pocket when I came home. So you can do a lot if you really want to. And that was the only way we had of going. Daddy couldn't afford to send us. Daddy was a good farmer, and he provided well for us. But he just made a good average living, like most farmers did around here.
You also mentioned your mom killed all the peach trees, switching you guys.
Right.
Can you give an example of something you would have done that would have gotten you in trouble, would have earned you a switching?
Yeah, a fight with one of the others.
So was there a lot of fighting between the siblings?
Not a lot, but we'd fuss or fight or something. She would give us a good switching. If you told her a story, she'd wait on you.
So if it's not embarrassing and if you feel okay sharing it, Can you think of an anecdote of something that happened that either you or one of your siblings did that got them really in trouble? Something like really bad they did? I know you don't want to say bad things, but you know.
Probably fighting each other. And we didn't fight all the time, but you know, you'd get in a squabble with siblings.
I had one other question as you were going that I thought about. Now I can't think of it.
Well, we had a great childhood. I have nothing but fond memories of growing up.
I remember what it was. So, holidays. It seems like today, Christmas is a big deal. A lot of presents. It seems almost consumerist. And you were saying that you guys didn't have a lot of toys as kids. Can you share what a holiday would have been like when you were a kid?
Well, the siblings would usually come home for Christmas, you know, and we had a lot of good food, but we didn't get a lot of toys and stuff. If we got something, it might have been something Mama had made for us, like a shirt she sewed beautifully, or something like that, a pair of shoes that we needed anyway. They didn't go out and spend a lot of money on Christmas.
I think you started with your parents' names, but I think I missed it. What were your parents' names?
My dad was Joseph Arch Boatwright, and Mama was Susan Elizabeth Boatwright.
What was her maiden name?
She was a Starling, Starling. And she was raised down close to Charles Springs. In fact, she said when my grandmother and grandfather got married, they did their washing down at Charles Springs. Each of the families had a wash pot down there, and they'd go down there because we didn't have dug wells then. And they'd go down there and get the water out of the springs, and they'd do their washing down there. And I guess carry them back home and hang them out.
Could you tell us the story about the orange trees and your grandfather, I believe?
Yeah, my grandfather had satsuma trees, and there was two big trees. I mean, they would fill they were huge. And we'd go down, and he would, of course, we started picking them when they was about this big. They was green as a gourd, but we'd pick them to aggravate them. So when they got ripe, they wouldn't offer you any, so we just went behind the wood house and would snitch oranges. And so when we started home, we'd fill our bosom full, our shirts full, and all that good stuff. They wouldn't share them, so we just took them anyway. And I've gone down when there'd be 8 or 10 bushels on the ground that had frozen or fallen off of the trees. But they were, I guess you'd say, too stingy to share them with us. But we didn't care. We got them anyway. We got our share, don't worry. They'd bail around, hollering, leave those oranges alone, but we'd get behind they couldn't tell who it was. So we picked them right on till they were all gone.
Do you remember, I've heard from someone that was from McAlpin that said that years ago, there was a lot of satsumas in this area, and then there was a big freeze that ended up killing them all. Do you remember that?
It killed my granddaddies. But we didn't have them. I have them now, but we didn't have them then. And I don't know, there was a lot of them, but I know he had 2 big trees. And the trees kind of grew together. They weren't planted too far apart.
Did y'all have pear trees?
We had 8 or 10 pear trees and about a dozen peach trees until Mama killed them all, getting switches off of.
What about pecan trees?
We didn't have any pecan trees.
Did your mother can mayhaws and fox grapes and?
Mm-hmm. She made all kinds of gin.
preserves?
She'd fill up the smokehouse, the shells in the smokehouse with it. But we ate a lot of syrup with cow cream and homemade butter and homemade biscuits.
Could you tell us how you made the syrup?
They grew the cane, and then they had a meal. It would be 2 or 3 rollers going together, and it would squeeze the juice, and then they would take and cook it in like an 80 or 60 100-gallon iron kettles until you had to cook it about 3 to 4 hours to get the water out of it, so it would thicken and make syrup.
And that would make about how many gallons?
About 7 gallons. So it took a lot of juice to make a little syrup. But that was delicious syrup. My daddy made good thick syrup. Now my granddaddy's was so thin, it would take a dozen biscuits to hem it up. And they were nice people. They were good people, but we didn't like the syrup at all.
Now, when you speak of your granddad, is that the one that Aunt Mandy Starling, is that side of the family or the other?
Yeah, because Aunt Mandy's husband was Mama's brother, oldest brother.
Since you was inspired at a young age to become a teacher one day, did you teach any of your siblings? Try to help them in school or?
Oh yeah, we'd call out stuff at night to each other, you know. But Spencer graduated from high school the same time I graduated from college, and he was the baby.
But at a very young age with Spencer and Ronald, did you teach them or try to teach them at home?
Oh, I did before I ever started in the first grade. And I'd get a little switch and switch them if they didn't do.
Sounds like you've been a teacher your entire life.
Yeah, Spencer was about 1 and Ronald was about 3. And I'd try to teach them this or that. They wanted to play off, and I'd get me a little switch and switch them. And you know, I didn't know anything much to teach them, and I don't know, but I was always their teacher. Mom would put us out to play, and I was the one that taught them. Maybe that's why both of them got master's and doctor's degrees.
Before you went to school to teach, did you do any chores on the farm before and after you got home from school? Like, did you have to milk the cows before you went to school?
I milked, and I did that even after I started teaching. I milked the cows until the old cow died. Daddy says, we got to get us a new cow, but my mother had already had died. Mama had died just before then. And I told him I just didn't have time because it takes a lot of work. You got to milk the cow, then you got to come in and strain it. You got to scald that stuff you put the milk in and wash the straining cloth and scald it and all that. So I didn't have time to do all that and teach school, get to school at about 8 o'clock.
When you was growing up, did your mother make homemade dresses from flour sacks, aprons, anything like that? Any type of material from flour sacks?
She made a few everyday dresses from it, not flour sacks, but feed sacks. But she sewed for everybody in the community. She sewed beautifully. She'd make like 3 or 4 dresses in a day. So she was a whiz at it.
Do you know if any of those dresses have survived?
Do what?
Do you know if any of those dresses have survived? Do you know if there are any sit somewhere around?
I don't know. Her clothes are still in the wardrobe in the utility room.
Oh, I think good to wrap up.
And she would make homemade hats, you know, with big brims around them and all that good stuff.
I remember the women used to all wear hats going to church.
Yeah. And,
And they sat on the left side of church and the men on the right.
yeah. They didn't sit together.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Boatwright, thank you very much for sharing with us the story of your life. You were very gracious, and we appreciate the insights and history that you have shared. Thank you, Uncle Sherwood Boatwright.
Thank you.